there. I hope you have all agreed that this can be recorded because these are all on YouTube. There is a channel. There's a channel with the SLA Canada videos from the last, almost a year now that we've started doing this. I'm Rebecca Jones, Dysart and Jones. This is Jane Dysart, my business partner. And we are just so delighted that we have this platform to be able to host the SLA Canada chats, because if we were doing these physically, we don't have a big meeting room. So at least we can offer it. We are delighted to have you here. I see that you all have yourselves on mute, and do please use the chat to let me know if you have a burning question, because I think Stephen would agree that he'd probably like to take questions sort of as they come up. So that, is that all right, Stephen? So it becomes much more engaging. Terrific, terrific. So I want to introduce Juanita Richardson. Many of you already know Juanita, but Juanita stepped up to be president of the SLA Canada community when we were going through the changes of merging all the SLA chapters. And so delighted to have you here with us, Juanita. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Jane. Dysart and Jones does sponsor all of our Zoom chatnars, and we're so lucky to have them on board. They have long been committed SLA people and very committed to the Canadian chapters within SLA, and so we're lucky that it's all come together as SLA Canada. And it's not just I who stepped up, of course. Jane is serving on our board of directors. Rebecca is always an advisor, and we have a large board group that works with us, including Caleb. You know, like I was about to say, I feel like Pokeroo. Okay, I'm dating myself. If anybody remembers, they'd have this fake mirror that you would say, and I see Caleb. And I see Keith Lowe, who I don't think I've seen in a very long time. And I see Karen Bleakley, who also is on our board of directors. Anyway, welcome to all of you. And Graham, who works for me. So welcome again. It is our pleasure, SLA Canada, to always have these chatnars available, open to anyone, really. Ideally, you'd be a member of SLA Canada, or an SLA member, or someone who's just interested in SLA. So all comers are welcome to join us and participate in these discussions. And with that, I will turn it back to Rebecca to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you very much. And I see that people have started to put in the chat where you are. If you are looking for an opportunity, put that in. And if you're not looking for an opportunity, also tell us where you're working. Hello, Karen. Oh, are you still in Cleveland? Let me know in the chat, and then when we open it up. Hello, Karen. How are you? Are you still in Cleveland?
I am still at Case, having a marvelous time.
Case,
marvelous. I think of you a lot. I'm glad to see you.
Fantastic. Delighted to have you here.
Yeah.
I saw your name on the registration list. I thought this is fantastic. And Rebecca Brizzi's about to join us from Georgia. Fantastic. Carolyn Coward, how are you? Are you in California? Fantastic. Oh, this is great. So I'm really excited about this. When Jane comes back home with her little basket of the ideas that she has for these chatnars, I always get quite excited about them, but particularly this one, because I tell you, I don't understand it. And I know that because Stephen is an information specialist with 10 years of experience, lots of experience, and now he's with Prescient, where he's the head of design research. I get that right, Stephen? Thank God. But you know, I even pronounced it properly. And most importantly, he also has put together the SLA working group on blockchain, which is like, thank you. So I'm hopeful that he's going to tell us what the hell's going on with that working group. Also help us understand more about how blockchain is going to really be revolutionizing how we look at rights management.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So if I can just get into it, I'll just share my screen here.
Go right ahead.
And so, and I'll just make this smaller here. So going through, you know, what blockchain is all about and what we're doing in 20 minutes is a bit of a whirlwind. So I'll try to get through this as efficiently as possible. But what I'll basically be going through is a bit of the talk that I did for the SLA conference that was this month, actually, just a few weeks ago. So we started this working group last year. I think it was September of last year, and it was really great to get a cohort of people from various sectors and various perspectives. One of the reasons that I wanted to sort of bring people together is I am working in the blockchain space, and I have certain ideas of how this could be applied, but not working in libraries right now, and having a limited point of view on some of these areas. It was great to bring in people of different backgrounds to sort of get their perspectives and to see what the potential use cases could be in applying this technology. So just a little bit about me is I am working in the space building applications in a startup innovation lab. One of the projects we're doing is a platform where you could be uploading creative works. Right now we're working with ebooks and visual art, and you're sort of making a claim to the work that this is my own, I own the copyright and that kind of stuff, and it actually creates a hash on the blockchain to create this permanent record of your claim. Why that is important or why that might be valuable, hopefully will become a little bit more clear as we sort of go through the talk. But as I'm, in this space sort of working with the technology, it becomes intuitive that this could be applied into the library space, and I do have this library background. So I'll go through it now. So our project scope, to define the current issues with information professionals and the customers and patrons. So to look at the problems that sort of exist in the space without blockchain was sort of the idea, because you don't want to be thinking about the technology and what solutions it can shoehorn into, because that way you sort of have a solution without a problem. Like when we go through this innovation process, you want to be starting with people's problems first and not inventing them and then adding a technology or a solution to them. Looking at sort of the different blockchain applications that exist out there, currently, like there's different applications that are out there, and how problems are being solved with blockchain might be applicable to sort of what we're doing. Also, determining the issues that are faced by information professionals, and then finding, is there a right fit with the blockchain technology? So in this first phase of the project, we wanted to, first of all, be looking at definitions of blockchain. Like when we're talking about blockchain, what are we really talking about? And I'll sort of get into those very different ideas of what blockchain is. And it's sort of important if we're moving together on the same page that we do have a mutual understanding. Looking at sort of the problems that exist in the space, as I was talking about, building out some use cases, and then putting together a position paper. And then that would sort of close off the initial phase. And then where we can move forward with is the potential of, getting funding and looking at building out one of these use cases into a proof of concept. And I'm fortunate working with people that are very good at writing grant applications. And some of the projects that we're working on, we've gotten a lot of money to build them out. So I'm excited to be sort of leveraging those people to sort of help us once we sort of move forward. Taking a step back, like when we're talking about blockchain, what are we really talking about? And to talk about this in like 5 or 10 minutes is a bit of a challenge. Talking about blockchain could be like a number of seminars, but really to bear down to the nuts and bolts of it, essentially what you have is a digital ledger that is recording a bunch of transactions that are happening in a specific moment of time. And in this example I've given, it's like a 10-minute period. So within the last 10 minutes, a number of transactions have happened. And for example, Dan is sending 2.5 units of something to Mason over here. And all of this is sort of being recorded on a digital ledger. It is getting a timestamp, and it's being formed into what we call a block. So I've sort of illustrated there as this ledger is sort of looks like a block. And then these blocks are set up sequentially, and they're linked together through a cryptographic hash to create the chain. So this is sort of what we mean by blockchain. We have transactions that are happening at a certain point in time. They're being recorded, and they're sort of linked together sequentially. And when they are recorded on the blockchain, the intention is that they are permanent and immutable, that they can't be changed. So this gives a certain value to the transactions that are happening. Popular use cases that are happening out in the world today are mostly financial. This is why you hear about, you know, the Bitcoins and Ethereum and whatnot. The exchange of value that's happening is monetary. But what we've come to know within the last 5 years is it doesn't have to be a financial transaction that's happening. Like Dan could be sending like an ebook to Mason that is linked to the blockchain, or any kind of digital asset. So that's what's really interesting, is getting beyond the financial stuff and into how could other value exchanges happen that are linked to a blockchain. How it sort of works is that, A wants to send a digital asset to, party B. This transaction is happening and represented online as a block, like I was talking about. And this block is broadcast to every party in the network. And it's the network that goes through a consensus mechanism or an activity to verify the transaction that's happened. So this way of verifying the transactions happens differently on different blockchains. On the most prominent and popular blockchains, it's called proof of work, which is all these different computers are working to solve an algorithm in the most efficient way possible. There's somebody who wins that sort of contest and is able to verify the transaction online. And this is where you hear about like all of the energy that it takes. Like there's as much electricity that goes into Bitcoin as there is used in Ireland, or that, these kinds of extreme, stories about the amount of resources that are used to approve things on a blockchain. This is why it sort of happens. It's through this sort of proof of work kind of idea. And this is why other ways of verifying the transactions are being looked at. So the block is then added to the chain. And then the asset is moved from party A to party B, and it's a final transaction. So once the asset is moved to party B, there's none of this like calling up your credit card and saying, I didn't mean to do that transaction kind of stuff. Like it's very final. So that's something that's very different than how we exchange value today. So it's very good in a way that it happens the way that it happens, but it also, you need to, be careful about what you're transacting on. Also, what's really important when you talk about blockchain is something other than blockchain, which is smart contracts, and how they are used in conjunction with blockchain actually creates much of the value to blockchains. Blockchains on its own is sort of one thing, but it's really in combination with smart contracts that makes it a really cool technology that can be quite impactful in many different sectors. So smart contracts are applying an automated logic of if then, like if this certain thing happens, then this other thing happens. And it's all automated on the blockchain. And let me sort of illustrate it in an example. Is you could have a librarian who is buying a book from any kind of vendor, that if it's linked to a blockchain with a smart contract, the royalties from that purchase could go directly to the different rights holders. So like author could get 25%, the publisher 50%, the editor 25%. If this seems a bit of a funny concept, I mean, this is something we actually did as a proof of concept in 2017. I actually presented it to SLA Toronto, the proof of concept of how we used, somebody using cryptocurrency is actually buying an ebook, and the royalties are going directly to the parties on the blockchain. So this stuff can actually be done, and we have done it. but it's an example of how smart contracts are sort of actuating an automated process. So you set up this logic beforehand of, these different parties will get a certain portion of the royalties. So every time a book is bought, it's guaranteed that, this action will happen. Coming back to the working group, where we started with was the need for definitions. And like I was sort of saying, it's really important in this sector to be very clear on what we're talking about when we talk about blockchains, because I've been to a lot of talks that will talk about certain concepts, and you can sort of tell that these different players are using terms that aren't quite aligned with each other. And I thought it was really important to come to that alignment. Also, blockchains come with a certain perspective on how you want things to be. So, and sometimes even people think of it as being political. Like with blockchain comes this idea of decentralization and distribution and wanting things to be open and free, libertarian, these kinds of things. So these kinds of politics and ideas come into it. Whereas, since the advent of these decentralized blockchains, corporations have gotten involved and made what is permissioned or private blockchains. And there is, that upsets some people that are sort of blockchain purists or that kind of thing. So it's sort of important to get a feel on how people feel about blockchain, because it really impacts the kinds of projects that we want to be building upon, down the road. Also, now the term is being abused. Like when Facebook came out with this Libra cryptocurrency, like this article here is, it's blockchain without the blocks or the chain, because it doesn't really do either of these things, and yet they call it a blockchain. So it is an abused term that is happening, and there's lots of media about it. So it's important to sort of nail that down. When talking about it with the group, what sort of came about is that there's a required, set of features that, defines a blockchain. And then there's these associated terms. So in order to be a blockchain, there definitely needs to be like a digital ledger that is append only, that has these sequence transactions. The value is transferred from one party to another using these private public keys, which is very analogous to like an email. Like you have a public address that people send in you an email, and you have your password to your email, and that's how you access, the whatever is being transferred to you. Cryptographic hashes that link the blocks together, timestamping, consensus mechanisms to verify the transaction. These are all things that must happen. But then often when people talk about like what a blockchain is, distributed, decentralized, a peer-to-peer network, this immutability, publicly accessible, that it's secure, and these smart contracts are things that are not actually necessarily required for a blockchain, but are often linked in those definitions of what it is. For example, the ISO definition came out this summer, and it talks about being a distributed ledger with confirmed blocks organized in append-only sequential chain using cryptographic links. And I think that's quite uncontroversial in many ways. But what's interesting is technically you could build a blockchain with only one person on it and one party validating it. It wouldn't be very useful, but this actually happens quite a bit when blockchains are beginning and you're testing things out. So it doesn't actually require it to be a distributed ledger, but that's a bit nitpicky because the value of it comes from a distributed network and that kind of thing. So it's, it makes complete sense to be talking about it in that way. Also, this definition is interesting because of the fact that it doesn't talk about consensus mechanisms or decentralization. It does sort of lend it to the fact that private, very closed blockchains could be used. I got a bing. I'm not sure what that means, but
Somebody's just coming in.
oh, okay.
They're running up the aisle.
So yeah, just quickly moving along here. Then we sort of move to what different issues sort of exist in information science. Of course, there's tons and tons and plethora of things, but some of the things that came up in the conversation, interesting conversation around some librarians that have a lot of experience in the space have, it was mentioned when I got into library science, the work that I do now is very different than the work that I did at the beginning of my career. And the work that I'm doing now is stuff that I never thought would happen. And there was a little bit of a concern that new technology could be very disrupting to what I'm doing now. And this was sort of part of the reason of wanting to start this group is the disruption that is potential from blockchain is very real in many sectors. Definitely got the banks worried for a while and thinking about how to do things differently, and that could also be applied to our space as well. Centralization of metadata is a problem that is addressed by one of the use cases that I'll talk about in a second. Remote services as well. Accessible design is something that came a big part that came into the conversation because there's somebody in our group who works with accessibility. It's really interesting in my perspective to hear about this because working in an innovation lab, you actually don't think about accessibility very much because you're usually defining a single persona and building to that persona because that is the quickest way to get something to market. And it's, in a way, it's a real shame because you're limiting who can actually be using what you're building. What's really nice about working with librarians is accessibility is much more focused and more commonplace, and it's really interesting and educational for me to be hearing about it. Getting into one of our first use cases was the centralization of metadata. So the problem that's being addressed, and it was something that was one of my initial thoughts of how blockchain could be applied to the information science space. It was also interesting to see that one of our working group members wrote his thesis on this very topic. I've heard other people talk about it in other blockchain libraries. So it's sort of like the thing that everybody's talking about. But it seems to be like in other groups that are working in the space aren't too eager on building an application sort of addressing this, which is that metadata is being sort of centralized into certain silos, like an OCLC kind of thing. And I've experienced it firsthand that trying to purchase or access bibliographic metadata from these kinds of sources can be extremely expensive and prohibitive. And there's a possibility that through decentralization and opening things up, that this kind of process could be more democratized in a way to make things more accessible, but also through the timestamping and the linking of metadata to a blockchain can make it more authoritative and kind of, that provenance of a record's life cycle is made more authoritative. So yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just have a question from Sam about networks. How's the size of a network determined? And phrased another way, how does one get authority to access a network?
So the answer is different depending on the blockchain. So if something is, completely decentralized and open, like a Bitcoin type thing, anybody can join the network and anybody can at least attempt to try to validate the transactions that are happening on the blockchain. The problem being with something as mature and robust as like a Bitcoin blockchain is that the firepower required computationally to actually validate any of those transactions is astronomical. So that's why there's giant server farms in China that are doing a lot of these kinds of validations. It's not something you'd be able to do on your home computer anymore. But if you backtrack into 2009, you could definitely get online and start doing it yourself. So anybody can participate in these networks if it's an open and decentralized network. If it's something that's more closed and permissioned, then there's sort of a gatekeeper that is allowing people to participate. For example, you might have a private blockchain that is just used by the big 5 banks in Canada. And you would need to be one of those banks in order to participate, or at least get permission from them. So the network size and the ability to enter depends on the rules set out in the inception of the blockchain.
Okay.
Hope that answers the question.
We'll find out. Yes.
Okay. Is there any other kind of questions before I move on? I probably should have
Before
taken
you
a
keep
breath.
going?
Pardon me, I didn't quite catch that.
Nope.
No? Okay. Yeah, please just stop me because I can't see the chat right now. So just stop me at any time as I
Thanks,
sort of
Stephen.
fire through it. So this use case, like I was saying, which is very much built upon the thesis that was put together by one of the members of the working group, is that you could have a cataloger come onto the application, enter in the metadata that would actually be linked to the blockchain to create this like authoritative permanent record of the blockchain. If the metadata record were to be updated, it would create a new transaction on the blockchain. And that's exactly what we're doing at work with this attribution ledger project that we've put out. In Chris's thesis, he actually opened up the cataloging to like anybody could come on and sort of enter in the information added to the blockchain. So there's these different considerations that could be brought into the proof of concept, is whether you keep it sort of closed into just professional catalogers or open it up into something much broader. This is just a screenshot of how the application will work. I don't really have time to sort of get into it, but what are sort of the benefits of a system like this? It would actually lower the cost of acquiring the different metadata records that are being put out there, potentially even free. It would create a decentralized system so that there wouldn't be this ability to monopolize all the metadata and then start selling it to people, and therefore keeping it open. And also, as I was talking about, the provenance of the records would be retained. So every time somebody changed something to like a bibliographic record, it would be recorded on the blockchain, and you would be able to see how these, the changes throughout its life. Some of the drawbacks. So at work, we are working with Ethereum, and at this, which is the second most, widely known blockchain out there. The problem is when you're interacting with, at this day and time, when you're interacting with, decentralized and open public blockchains, there's transaction costs on to operate on these systems, and these transaction costs can be quite prohibitive and quite expensive. And this is something that's being worked on these blockchains to improve this, to make it a lot cheaper. And it's really what's holding things back at the moment is this throughput on transactions and the transaction costs. So that's something that, we might be able to see changing as early as next year, as some of these new ideas will be coming into fruition. It's also a system change. Metadata standards could be, negatively affected if cataloging was open to everyone. I have a lot of experience with like folksonomies and keywords, and it's a bit of a mess a lot of times. So that's a consideration. Also designing incentives, which Chris had developed into his ideas, designing incentives for people to be coming on to the platform and wanting to be cataloging can be somewhat challenging. And this is what's talked about with, you know, in a lot of projects on blockchains, is designing these incentives is a real challenge.
Stephen, can
there's
I interrupt for 1 minute?
Yeah,
Sorry, it's Rebecca. So
Yeah.
one of the challenges, as you said, is the cost.
yeah.
So who is ultimately going to pay the cost?
So it would, I mean, it sort of depends how we lay out this proof of concept. Like
Yeah.
it could be done so that the cataloger is the one who's paying for the transaction. There could be an organization sort of behind it that is footing the bill. Like for example, at our project at Prescient, it's of course us that is the one that's paying these transaction fees as users come onto the platform and doing that kind of thing.
Right.
So there's different ways of doing it, but what we're really looking to is that these blockchains will be improving in the near future to sort of alleviate these kinds of problems. And I think that's why, well, it is why, like if you go back to 2017, there was such a buzz about blockchain and everybody was going crazy, you know, buying cryptocurrencies, and it was all over the news and this kind of thing. You hear less of it now because there hasn't been a lot of movement in solving some of these problems that currently exist on these blockchains. But that's not to say that they won't be solved. It's just we're at this point in time with the technology. The analogy I find is quite apt and is commonly used, you know, linking where we are with blockchain to where we were with the internet. Like if we're sort of in, you know, the early 1990s of the internet is sort of where we are now with blockchain. But at some point, you know, the light bulb comes on for everyone, and then things get rolling with the internet. That is what's possible with blockchain, and what a lot of people are sort of investing a lot of brain power and resources in actuating.
I bet. Sam just has a follow-up to that question about cost. And what are the anticipated costs as it stands right now, like a price per transaction?
Yeah, it really fluctuates depending on sort of what's happening on these public blockchains.
Okay.
If I go back to when we did that proof of concept, like in the prime of public blockchains being expensive, like uploading a book to Ethereum and creating a smart contract was as expensive as $70 for like one transaction.
So
now
of the uploading the whole book?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's like a one-time transaction, which is obviously astronomical and prohibitive, and like that just doesn't work for anyone. And it's cheaper now that you know, the price of Ethereum has sort of gone down. The other thing to sort of consider is there's these popular blockchains that exist, but then there's other blockchains that are coming out that are also solving these problems that are worth taking a look at. Like it's a very rapidly changing space, and there's newer things coming month to month that are worth like taking a look at. For example, a couple of years ago, you would say definitely building an application on Ethereum is the way to go. Today, maybe not. So it's yeah, it's just sort of keeping up with the space and looking at things are changing. But I would say that the price of transactions isn't something to worry about too much. Again, this is sort of a problem that's existing today, but like I was saying, there's changes that are coming out to some of these blockchains even next year that's going to be making these blockchains a lot more applicable, solving throughput problems, solving these price problems. The point being is you don't want to wait until, you know, these problems get solved, because then other people will have entered the space that are already ahead, that have already disrupted what you are working on.
Yeah.
So it's about staying ahead of the game and anticipating what's coming next. I think a lot of people are like, blockchain, that was just a fad, that's over. But it's worth taking a look at, because if you're wrong, you could be out of a job. so yeah.
Right. And one last question before you go back is, so just continuing on here, Carolyn asks about security threats. Are they prone to hacking and security threats? Is that one of the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, security threats exist at different, first of all, hi, Caroline. She's a member of our working group. So, I just emailed her the other day. So hi, nice to hear from you. Yeah, the security threats, there's different levels of security problems depending on the blockchain. And there's different levels of security threats depending on the different applications that interact with the blockchain. So if you take a look at something like, again, I hate talking about Bitcoin, but it's like the most robust and most secure sort of application that's out there. To be able to hack Bitcoin is so difficult with the kind of computational power and the kind of resources required that it's almost impractical. You would need to be spending millions of dollars, every second in order to overwhelm the network in that kind of way. Because that's sort of really the only way to be hacking these blockchains is you can't actually go in like you would, hacking into somebody's database or hacking into Sony's emails or hacking into a government database. These things can't be done with a kid in a laptop anymore. You need to have significant resources to sort of overwhelm a network. This is a lot easier in a in a network that isn't as mature or isn't being as used as much. But when something becomes more broadly used and more the network becomes large enough, it becomes very secure and is less prone to these security issues. Now, having said that, you see in the news all the time, like exchanges for cryptocurrencies are being hacked all the time. People hold these cryptocurrencies in what are called wallets, which is a digital application, and these can be hacked. So the applications that interact with blockchains can be hacked. Blockchains itself being hacked is difficult depending on the blockchain. As you move from a public distributed, widely distributed blockchain to something that is more private and smaller in network, it becomes more easy to overwhelm. And that's sort of one of the things that is less appealing about private permissioned blockchains, is they don't have that same security that comes with widely distributed and even decentralized networks.
Great.
Is there anything to add to that, Caroline, or are you thinking about the Litecoin hack that happened recently, or?
No, the reason I asked is every once in a while the conversation will bubble up, and when I try to disabuse people about the difference between blockchain and Bitcoin,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm starting my video. Then the next argument against using blockchain is, oh, well, it's so easily hackable and it's not secure. And I challenge them. I say, where did you hear that? And what particular, can you tell me about a use case? And sometimes they do say either Litecoin, or they heard a friend of a friend, or like you were saying, these adjunct applications that may or may not be as secure. But the chain itself is pretty immutable unless, as you say, you have the firepower to do this 51% attack to really overwhelm, especially a robust and long time system.
Yeah, it's something that gets misrepresented quite a bit. And I can remember going to a talk and people were talking about blockchain, and these are, kind of expert type people talking about Bitcoin being hacked, and it's like, whoa, 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 Bitcoin wasn't hacked. That exchange was hacked. That's like these applications are getting hacked, and that's very different. So it's important to make that distinction.
And then Sam in the chat was talking about, well, what if you upload malicious code to the chain? And that can easily be taken down because it is a distributed network. You have versions of the network everywhere. So if someone discovers a bad node or something malicious in one area, that can be walled off pretty easily.
Yeah.
And then you just replicate with these other areas.
Yeah, exactly. It's the majority rules. So the one bad apple can't overwhelm the network, and the consensus is taken from everybody else's ledger. So I guess to kind of answer that question is these people that are participating on the network that, you know, are validating these transactions all have a copy of the ledger, right? So if somebody, you know, is making a you know, malicious recordings onto the ledger, it doesn't really matter if 1, 2, 3, 10 people are all doing it, when you've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of people with the ledgers, you know, somewhere else that is able to say,
And you just said the word consensus, and that really is the key.
Yeah.
It is a consensus network.
Yeah, exactly. But as you move into smaller networks or more private networks, it can lose some of that that ability that we're talking about.
Because you lose the ability to scale. I mean, it's like you can't dilute the bad apples because you've only got maybe 1,000 people looking at this stuff.
But again, like then the question, if the question is, well, why are people looking at these private blockchains at all? Then it's because of the different problems that exist on these big blockchains, make it not usable today, at least for, you know, these corporate applications. Like, you know, Ethereum does 15 transactions per second, and Visa does whatever, tens of thousands.
And the majority of them are governed by these smart contracts. So you have that it's not just loading stuff into the chain. There are rules that the data has to follow in order to be propagated.
Yeah, yeah. But again, you know, the thing is about the private blockchains is people are trying to take this technology and sort of apply it in a way that's usable for them. In doing so, it dilutes some of the benefits from blockchain, and that's why a lot of corporations are saying, well, blockchain isn't like right for us now, or it's not ready for prime time, or this kind of thing. That's not to say that private blockchains aren't useful. Just like the internet, again, the internet is extremely useful, and intranets have their place and are extremely useful as well. But what I'm hoping for in the future is one where there is the internet that is the pervasive and valued application, and not intranets, because there was a moment in time in history where people were like, intranets, this is the way to go, not this internet thing. So we're sort of at that point now, right? Where people are trying to take the technology, use it in the way that works for them. And sometimes they're seeing the benefits and sometimes they're not, so.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to do the case study, and then we'll go back to some other questions. Deal?
Yeah, there was just another case study that we were looking at, controlled digital lending, but I think I might skip over that for time because I think I'm already way over time.
It's okay.
But I just sort of wanted to show this use case because it's sort of, you know, the audacious goal. Like when talking about this kind of stuff with the group, you know, if you're thinking about incremental changes to our workflows and how we do things, the problem is that there's going to be somebody else that is going to be thinking much bigger and larger and come in and, you know, eat your lunch, right? This is sort of the way that disruption in these kind of technologies work. If you're not thinking big and broad, somebody else will. And then once that way of working, that platform, that application comes out, and you've just moved 5-10%, and they've like moved the bar from 0 to 1, then it could be tough. So it's just something to think about. And there are people out there already thinking about some of these interesting applications that could be possible with libraries, because this use case is built on a white paper that came out a few years ago about how you could be having a library system that works completely in an automated way using smart contracts.
Mm.
So, you know, they call this the DAO, like a digital decentralized autonomous organization. These organizations have been attempted in the past and have failed for various reasons. One of them being like the exploitation of the code and this kind of thing, which I can get into a little bit more. But that's not to say, you know, just because it failed once doesn't mean it's going to fail in the future. So it's something to think about is you could have this system where, like, a patron could be taking something like an item out of a library, let's say a book, and certain requirements are sort of put upon the patron as they take another book. For example, they need to return it to the library at a certain time, or this kind of thing. But what this one white paper called LibChain was talking about is you could have a system where somebody's taking an item out of a library, a digital item would even be the easiest, that they could pass that item along with all of its obligations to the library to another patron. So I could take an ebook out of the library, and then after I'm done with it, I could pass it along to Caroline, who can then pass it along to somebody else. So then you could actually have an ecosystem of content that is being distributed without even actually interacting with the library at all. But it would all be tracked, you know, where everyone could see who owns what, you know, obligations, like who has it now kind of thing. And when I say who has it, it doesn't mean they have your name and address and phone number,
Right.
but it's like this entity has it and has these applications, has these obligations.
Right.
And there could be this new ecosystem of content distribution that could be happening from the library. And, you know, these decentralized and autonomous libraries could be interacting and, you know, doing interlibrary loans with other traditional libraries and this kind of thing. You could be having rights holders and librarians, you know, delivering content to the platform, you know, themselves. Like, there doesn't need to be this gatekeeper of the library to be absorbing content. So this is something that has already been talked about. If you think it's a bit of a crazy idea, I mean, this is being done in other spaces with other applications. The funny one being, I guess, CryptoKitties is something that people have heard about, where, you know, it's a collectible digital figure that you can sort of, you know, you sort of buy using cryptocurrency, and then you are the only one that has it, but you can trade it with other people, and it's all connected to the blockchain. So the way that CryptoKitties are distributed, it doesn't matter that it's a CryptoKitty, it's a digital item. It could be anything. It could be an ebook, could be digital music, could be digital movies, could be anything, right? So you sort of need to sort of think that way about what's possible. Caroline, I saw the hand go up.
Yeah, just one other use case for academic librarians. Imagine assigning some digital content, maybe a journal article, to a group of students that you're working with. You can see who's not only who's read the article, but who's currently reading the article and where they are in the article.
Right.
They can also, if you do, depending on how you set up your blockchain, they can post questions. They can have conversations with each other while following the content.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Yeah, and that's, so of course, then that brings in privacy issues, doesn't it?
Well, maybe not, sort of depending on how you sort of build the application. Like, do you really need to know anything about these people that are taking out the books, or can they just be represented as a 64-digit alphanumeric number where you don't really need to know anything about them?
Right. Right.
So it depends what are the requirements of what you need to know about the people that use it. If the answer is nothing, then privacy doesn't really become a problem. If the answer is, yeah, I need to know if they live in Toronto or in Canada or in North America, then these are different things that need to be considered but aren't insurmountable by any means.
And because there are implications for copyright. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Can I sneak in here?
Yeah.
I really, I'm so glad Sam just brought up the copyright issue in the chat as well. And a couple of years ago, we had Don Tapscott, who wrote, one of the first books around blockchain, speaking to Donna Sheeter's IFLA president's meeting. And I got really excited because one of the examples he used was in the music industry.
Yeah.
How a musician could have their music on the blockchain and sell it directly to whoever, but he holds, or she holds, that copyright. So I got really excited thinking, oh, wow, this is going to revolutionize copyright. However, just like you mentioned the internet, to me, it's like Skype. In the late 1990s, you could do phone calls over the internet. Out as a consumer product in Skype. It had been used by companies, but was done differently. So it takes time. And we did a couple of years ago too, a blockchain in government conference. And at that point was how I sort of understood supply chain. Where lettuce for Walmart, they know from where it comes to, the end point, or from the World Wildlife Federation that can say this tuna was caught here and this is where it, ended up in the restaurant. So you can authenticate where all of this has come from and observe it. So that really made it easier for me to understand. And then there's great examples in the real estate industry, in identity cards, and health records is another one.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to hear you say, Stephen, about the work that you're doing now is not the work that you were thinking you may be doing down the road. And that's the whole thing about this disruption. You really don't know what skills, what jobs, what you're going to be doing, 10 years from now. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Just one last thing I just wanted to mention on this use case, that it's sort of one of the areas of blockchain that kind of appeals to me quite a bit, is, again, when you are going back to the internet analogy, if you went into the 90s of the internet, you're sending messages to other people on the other side of the world and you're thinking, oh, this internet thing is really cool, isn't it great? And we had this idea at that point in time what the internet would be, not knowing down the road it's the Facebook and the Amazon that is going to be the killer apps that is going to change everything. And what I think is potentially quite interesting with blockchain isn't like, there's the things that we're talking about, but what could also happen is the creation of these incentives and economies that arise out of the communities interacting with each other. So you could have, like in this use case of this decentralized library kind of thing, that if a patron has a book and maybe like recommends the book to, and passes it on to a different patron, and that patron returns it to the library, that original patron gets rewarded in some kind of way. And that does not need to be it doesn't have to be a monetary reward. It could be like a badge of some kind. Like there's these kinds of gamification that can happen, that can incentivize users to do certain behaviors. And I have a colleague that works a lot in crypto economics and this kind of game theory kind of idea. And in my mind, at this point, like, I think that that area is something that could be the killer app when we look down the road is not necessarily the immutability and, you know, these features that we're talking about blockchain, what we are sort of thinking about today, but the creation of economies and communities could be something that's even bigger. So I just wanted to throw that out there as some food for thought.
Wow. Wow. I just thank you so much, Stephen. I know we're completely out of time.
Yeah.
And so I just want to officially, before people have to jump off, say thank you so much. I had no idea that this working group was even in place. And Carolyn, I didn't know until he put the names up that you were on it too. It's fantastic to know that this is. So how do we keep up with the working group?
So awesomely, Caleb has put everything onto the SLA Canada website.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I know that I think there was only one question we didn't get to, and that was Sharon's. I'm sorry, Sharon, about you know, people in authority. So much information, my brain is full. Yes, my brain is full too. What would you recommend that we, for those of us that are just coming to grips with this, what do you recommend that we start with, Stephen? To watch or listen to, read?
I actually recommend that if people are interested in blockchain is to go through the history of it.
Okay.
Like to start with the Bitcoin white paper, to know what problems it was trying to solve and where it's coming from, I feel is really interesting. And because it's an evolutionary process. It started with Bitcoin and then Ethereum came out and in its white paper, it addresses Bitcoin and then takes it further. And then people have other white papers that come after it that are addressing what came before it. So it's a chronological process. And I feel, you know, it's worth putting the time into, if you're interested, to sort of see what people are really talking about. And it's to hear the words from the horse's mouth. Like to read the Ethereum white paper and see what its creator Vitalik Buterin was talking about is much more authoritative than it is to read it in articles and, you know, get it from somewhere else where it's more dumbed down and diluted. So that's what I tell people.
Okay. Thank you so
much. Also, send me an email.
Thanks for using, yeah, or send you an email. Thanks for using our platform to share your insights and your incredible knowledge. And Jane and Juanita, did you have anything you wanted to say to send us off? Jane, yes?
Well, just one other resource made me think of Jason Griffey, who is with NISO right now, but he really has followed this kind of technology and has spoken about it before with other conferences that we've been involved. So he's an interesting guy to help translate if you need to jump in at a different level.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned this before, but also just to follow up on that, like San Jose State University has done a lot of great work and they have a lot of great resources when talking about blockchain and its application to information science. So when talking about information science and blockchain, that is definitely the place to start. Also, they, along with Jason Griffey, put out that chorus of libraries in blockchain. I'm not sure if it's still up, but I definitely went through that. And if it's still up, I recommend taking a look at it because it's really
great. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. This will be up on YouTube, but will also be on the Dysart Jones site. Thank you so much, all of you, and particularly Stephen. And what a pleasure to finally meet you.
Yeah, pleasure to meet you and talk to all of you. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks. Have a safe and healthy day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.